My daughter-in-law came into $55 million after my son died. Her first act wasn't mourning, it was eviction. She ordered me out of the very house my son and I had built with our own hands, spitting out that I should go die in a dumpster. I didn't argue. I simply slipped on my coat, walked out into the cold, and made a single phone call. 5 days later, she was on her knees begging me for $1. She should have listened more closely when the will was read. She should have realized my son had known exactly who she was all along. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you believe that patience and wisdom are the strongest weapons a person can wield. The morning after we buried my son Ethan, the quiet inside his home was deafening. It wasn't the soft, sacred stillness of grief. It was brittle, tense, ready to break. I sat in the leather armchair he and I had chosen years earlier and stared at the empty space beside me. Every inch of the house ached with his absence. He lived on in the sunlight sliding across the floorboards we had laid, in the faint scent of the old books from the library we'd built together, in the low hum of the servers in the basement that powered the company he had started from nothing. Then I heard it, the sharp rhythm of heels striking the hardwood upstairs. The sound sliced through the silence like disrespect. Vanessa descended the grand staircase, not in black, but in a perfectly tailored cream-colored suit that looked freshly pressed. Her makeup was immaculate, her expression carved in composure. She passed me without a glance, a trail of expensive perfume following her. Pulling out her phone, she began to speak in a crisp, businesslike tone. "No, the timeline needs to move up," she said, heading toward the kitchen. "Liquidate the secondary assets before the quarter ends. Efficiency is everything. The past is already behind us." At that moment, I felt like a forgotten relic, something left behind in a museum of memories she was eager to erase. The silence that followed was heavier, colder. I knew then that the storm hadn't passed. It was only gathering. The next morning found us sitting in the polished mahogany conference room of my son's lawyer, Mr. Langford. The air smelled of leather and old paper. I had known Langford for 20 years. He had seen Ethan grow from a curious boy into a determined man. His eyes flickered with sympathy before professionalism returned to his voice. Across the table, Vanessa sat upright, hands folded, posture perfect. More like a CEO preparing for a takeover than a widow saying goodbye. Mr. Langford adjusted his glasses and began to read the last will and testament of Ethan Caldwell. The wording was formal, the tone detached, but the message was painfully clear. Clause after clause transferred everything. His controlling shares in the Dynamics company worth over $50 million, his investments, vehicles, art, accounts, and the house, to his beloved wife, Vanessa Caldwell. My name appeared only once, in a single sterile line. To my father, Henry Caldwell, I leave my deepest gratitude for being my first and greatest teacher. My lungs emptied. It wasn't about wealth. I had never cared about that. It was about being erased from my own son's story. When I glanced at Vanessa, her lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile, cold, triumphant. To her, I was no longer a grieving father, just an afterthought in her empire. As the lawyer's voice droned on, a memory surfaced so vividly it stole my breath. I was sitting across from Ethan in a shabby diner 2 decades earlier. He'd been showing me his first business plan, hands shaking with a mix of fear and excitement. I had just sold the modest home his mother and I once shared and slid a check, everything I owned, across the table to him. "It's too big a risk, Dad," he had said, his voice trembling. I smiled and pushed the check back toward him. "It's not a risk, son," I told him quietly. "It's faith in you." Now, sitting in that sterile office, I watched the woman who controlled every cent of that investment, and I saw nothing of my son in her eyes. Only calculation. When we returned to the house, the thin layer of courtesy between us disintegrated. Vanessa moved through the rooms not like a widow but like an appraiser. Her gaze swept over every surface, every memory, cold and assessing. She paused in front of the wall of photographs, Ethan as a child, his mother's smile, pictures of the two of us on fishing trips. All of this has to go, she announced, voice sharp. It's just clutter. I want a clean, modern look. Then she turned to the bookshelf filled with Ethan's prized first edition science fiction novels. These can be sold. They're probably worth something. Her phone rang. She answered on speaker, her voice echoing through the room with smug confidence. Yes, it's all finalized, she said, a laugh in her throat. 55 million, not counting the property. I'm the sole owner now. Complete control. She locked eyes with me as she said those last words, her expression a challenge, a warning. In that moment, she claimed everything, not just the house or the money, but the world my son and I had built together. And she made sure I knew it was no longer mine. I wasn't a guest in my son's home anymore. I had become something far less human, a ghost haunting the corridors of what was now her property. And deep down, I knew with a bone-deep certainty that she was preparing to exorcise me from it completely. For the next 2 days, I found refuge in the only place that still carried the warmth of my son's presence, the library. To anyone else, it might have been just a room filled with books, but to me it was a cathedral built of memory and love. Ethan and I had crafted the towering oak shelves ourselves, laughing as the smell of varnish mixed with dust in the air. Each book had its own story, not only in the words printed inside, but in how it came to rest on those shelves. A rare Asimov I'd hunted down for his 20th birthday. A signed debut novel from a writer he once admired. His old college textbooks, filled with scribbles and notes that captured the restless curiosity of his mind. I would spend hours there, fingertips brushing the spines, straightening volumes that had shifted, feeling as though his energy still lingered between those pages. It was the last untouched place in the house, the one room she hadn't yet poisoned with her cold appraisal. That illusion shattered when the heavy oak door burst open one afternoon, crashing against the doorstop with a sharp crack that broke it clean. Vanessa stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men whose sheer size seemed too large for the frame. They wore athletic clothes and impassive expressions. Men built for demolition, not conversation. Vanessa herself looked like she'd just stepped out of a luxury gym advertisement. Sleek sportswear, perfect posture, hair tied into a severe ponytail. She didn't see the room. She assessed it, like a developer inspecting an old building she meant to tear down. All right, this is the space, she announced to the men, her voice brisk, detached. As you can see, it's just dead weight. All this dark wood, all these old papers, it's depressing. Her gaze finally met mine, sharp and unkind. Henry, she said, each syllable clipped and cold. I need all of this junk cleared out by tomorrow. The elliptical and weight machine arrived Friday. I placed the book I'd been holding back on the shelf, steadying my hands though I could feel the tremor rising inside. Turning to her, I spoke quietly, forcing calm into my tone. Vanessa, I said, this isn't junk. This was Ethan's collection, his sanctuary. This room is the heart of the house. It's where his memory lives. The 2 men shifted uneasily, glancing anywhere but at me. I was appealing to a sense of humanity I wasn't sure she had. You can have any other room, I added softly. Please, just not this one. I wasn't pleading for myself. I was pleading for him, for the last fragment of my son that still lived within these walls. For a heartbeat, she only stared at me, disbelief flickering in her eyes, as though shocked that I dared to defy her. Then, a sharp laugh, harsh, humorless. Memory? She spat. What good is memory, Henry? You can't liquidate memories. Her composure cracked. The polished civility she had worn like armor began to twist into something cruel, venomous. Her voice rose, echoing off the shelves that had once heard laughter. I am so sick of you wandering this house like some ghost, touching everything, reminding me of a past I want gone. She stepped closer, her finger stabbing the air in my direction. This is my house now, my life. You are not part of it. Then came the words, the ones that would brand themselves into my mind forever, the ones that fueled everything that followed. "You are not welcome here anymore," she screamed. "Get out of my house. Go die in a dumpster for all I care." She turned to her hired muscle, her voice dropping to a command edged in venom. "Get him out." Before I could react, they moved. One grabbed my left arm, the other my right. Their grips were iron, impersonal, efficient, like men tasked with moving heavy furniture. I didn't fight. The shock hollowed me out, leaving no strength to resist. They guided me through the library, my feet dragging slightly across the Persian rug. I glanced back once, at my son's sanctuary, before the heavy oak door closed behind me with a solid, final click. The lock turned, a sound that carried the weight of a verdict. I had been exiled from my own son's heart. The front door slammed, and the echo rolled through the air like a gavel striking. I heard the metallic snap of the deadbolt sliding into place, sealing my fate. Standing outside on the stone path, I looked around at the manicured lawn stretching neatly to either side. On the grass, absurdly out of place, sat my old leather suitcase. She must have packed it herself, a final act of cruel efficiency. I pictured her sorting through my things, her manicured fingers brushing across my worn sweaters and dog-eared books, judging their worth before stuffing them into the bag and instructing her men to toss it out like waste. Humiliation hit like ice, a tight knot in my gut. The sky above was a dull, merciless gray, the color of wet concrete. A cold wind stirred, rustling the leaves of the oak tree Ethan and I had planted when the foundation of the house was first laid. Then came the first drop of rain, cold against my cheek. Another followed. Soon, a thin, steady drizzle blurred the edges of the world. I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the rain mingle with the tears I hadn't realized were falling. My gaze rose to the house, our house. Through the window of the library, I saw only darkness. I remembered Ethan insisting on that very window, saying he wanted to read there in the morning light. I saw the stone facade we'd built together, our hands scraped raw, our laughter echoing between hammer blows. Every brick, every window, every shingle carried a memory. Now it all stood as a monument to betrayal. The cold rain seeped through my coat, dragging me backward through time. To another yard, another house, a quarter-century earlier. Ethan had been just a teenager then. Lanky, determined, full of dreams. Helping me repair a broken fence post under the same gray sky. Ethan's hands had been clumsy that day, but his determination burned through every awkward motion. I remembered pausing our work, resting a hand on his shoulder, and saying the same words that now echoed painfully in my mind. "A man's character isn't measured by what he owns, Ethan," I told him. "It's measured by what he's willing to protect. His name, his honor, his family." He'd looked up from the fence post toward the horizon beyond our modest little home, eyes full of wild dreams. Then came that boyish smile, a brief, brilliant flash of the man he would one day become. "Someday, I'm going to build us a real house, Dad," he said, his voice trembling with certainty. "Something big and strong, so you'll always have a place to come home to. It won't be mine, it'll be ours." The memory dissolved, leaving behind an ache that hollowed me from the inside out. That promise, pure, unguarded, sacred, was what Vanessa had truly cast aside when she threw me out. Not the furniture, not the walls, not the $55 million. It was that promise she had buried under her greed. The money was just numbers. The house just wood and stone. But that vow, that bond between father and son, had been the foundation of my life. And she had shattered it. As I stood in the steady rain, grief slowly gave way to something sharper, colder, clarity. The ache inside me condensed into a single point of focus. My spine straightened, my shoulders pulled back. I gave the house one last look. Not of sorrow, but of calculation, of resolve. I crossed the soaked lawn, my shoes sinking into the soft ground, and picked up my suitcase. The leather handle felt firm in my grip. Without turning back, I began the long walk down the driveway. Each step struck like a vow. The game wasn't over. She'd made her move. Now it was my turn. I must have looked pitiful. An old man in his 70s, drenched, clutching a single suitcase while the rain washed away the remnants of his old life. A yellow taxi slowed as it passed, its headlights slicing through the mist. I raised my hand, and the driver pulled over. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with eyes full of quiet kindness. He didn't ask questions, just took my bag and placed it in the trunk. "Where to, sir?" he asked gently. I couldn't bear to go to a friend's home and face their pity. I needed distance, anonymity, silence. "The Starlight Motel," I said, naming a place from decades past. Somewhere on the edge of the highway, where people went when they didn't want to be found. The drive blurred into streaks of rain and neon. The windshield wipers beat out a rhythm that sounded like a question. What now? What now? What now? As we left behind the manicured streets and grand houses, the world around us changed. Wealth fading into strip malls, gas stations, and forgotten warehouses. When the taxi finally stopped, the sight before me was both familiar and foreign. The motel's sign flickered in the rain, one letter missing, so it read Starlight Motel. The neon buzzed weakly, casting a sickly glow over cracked pavement. The air smelled of wet asphalt and distant exhaust. Inside, the clerk barely looked up as he handed me a key. The room was small and tired. A faded brown bedspread stretched tight over a lumpy mattress, the air thick with dust and disinfectant. A single yellow lamp struggled against the gloom, and a tiny TV clung to the wall by rusted bolts. It was the polar opposite of the life I had just been exiled from. The grand rooms, the fresh flowers, the art worth more than my first house. That world now felt imaginary, like a dream someone else had lived. I set my suitcase on the rickety luggage stand and sat on the bed. The springs groaned beneath my weight. The hum of the mini fridge and the hiss of passing tires were the only sounds. For the first time in days, I was completely alone, enclosed in silence that was mine and mine alone. But it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the stillness of a chessboard after a powerful move has landed. The stillness before retaliation. I thought about Vanessa's greed, so brazen it was almost childish. I thought about Ethan's will, written so simply, so cleanly. Too cleanly. My son had been methodical, a man who planned for every variable. In business, he never left a single detail unchecked. Could he really have overlooked his own father? Could he have left me that exposed? No, it didn't add up. And in my 70 years, I'd learned one truth that time never disproved. When a story doesn't make sense, it's because you're missing a chapter. A new thought began to take shape, not hope exactly, but a hypothesis. Possibility. What if Ethan hadn't been blind? What if he'd been deliberate? That spark of suspicion lit a small, steady flame inside the darkness. It was enough. I reached into my coat pocket and closed my hand around the cool shape of my phone. The screen glowed against my face as I scrolled past names I couldn't bear to call. Friends, acquaintances, old colleagues. Then I stopped on one, Mr. Langford. For a long moment, my thumb hovered above the name. One heartbeat suspended between despair and purpose. A question hung in the still air of that dim motel room. Surrender or fight back? My hand trembled for only a moment before steadying. Then, with quiet resolve, I pressed the call button. The battle ahead was no longer about what had been taken from me. It was about what I was going to do next. The phone rang once, twice. Each tone cut through the silence like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. I wasn't just calling a lawyer. I was reaching for a lifeline, a final thread connecting me to the son I had lost. Langford. His voice was as measured as always, though fatigue edged his tone. Then, a flicker of recognition. "Henry," he said, concern softening the professional mask. "Are you all right? I was just about to call you." That stopped me cold. He was about to call me. He had been expecting this moment. I drew a deep breath, forcing my emotions behind the calm, steady voice of a man who refused to sound broken. Good evening, Mr. Langford. I began, my words deliberate and precise. I'm calling to inform you that I'm no longer residing at my son's home. Vanessa made it clear I was not welcome. I've taken a room at the Starlight Motel off the interstate. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was weary understanding, the sound of someone who had been waiting for this news. Then came a long exhale, a sigh that carried the weight of secrets held too long. Henry, he said quietly. His voice stripped of formality now, replaced by genuine sorrow. I'm so sorry you had to endure that, truly, but I can't say I'm surprised. My grip on the phone tightened. Not surprised. The faint suspicion I'd nursed since the night of my eviction hardened into certainty. My son had known. He had seen this coming. Ethan was a brilliant man, Langford continued softly. He could anticipate market shifts and predict trends years ahead. He saw the world as patterns, lines of code, probabilities, outcomes. And he saw those same patterns in people. He knew his wife, loved her perhaps in his own way. But he was no fool. He was a strategist, always prepared, always with a contingency. I closed my eyes and saw my son's face. Not the smiling portrait that hung in his office, but the quiet, thoughtful look he wore when he thought no one was watching. That subtle worry he carried like a shadow. When Langford spoke again, his tone had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by the sharp precision of a man stepping into his professional duty. Henry, I'm about to tell you something I was legally bound to keep secret. A promise I made to Ethan. I was never to reveal it unless certain conditions were met. By forcing you out of the house, Vanessa has fulfilled those conditions. I held my breath. Ethan left you a sealed envelope, he continued, along with detailed private instructions. The will we read last week was legally valid, but incomplete. It was only the first move in a larger plan your son set in motion, one he knew he might not live to finish. A wave of emotion hit me so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Grief, sharp and raw, mingled with awe at his foresight and a crushing love for the son who still protected me, even from beyond the grave. What are you saying? I whispered, though my heart already knew. Langford's voice grew firmer, resolute. I'm saying there's another clause, a contingency that only activates under specific circumstances. Ethan called it his character test. He wanted to give Vanessa a chance to prove him wrong, to choose decency over greed, family over ambition. But he also planned for the probability that she wouldn't. That small flame of purpose inside me roared to life. My son hadn't abandoned me. He had armed me. Langford's next words weren't comfort. They were a call to arms. She's failed the test, Henry. She's made her move. Now it's time for us to make Ethan's. His voice over the line felt like a rope thrown to a drowning man, pulling me out of the wreckage of the last few days and setting me back on solid ground. To understand what Ethan did, Langford continued, now speaking like a strategist unveiling a master plan, you have to see that he didn't write a simple will. He designed an ethical and legal test, one that used his entire fortune as the experiment. I could almost see Ethan in that explanation, the careful planner, the visionary who saw 10 steps ahead. The document we read, Langford said, was only the opening move, the bait. It gave Vanessa everything she believed she wanted, but it came with one nearly invisible thread. He paused. A clause built around fiduciary duty. He let the term hang in the air before explaining. It's a common phrase in law, usually nothing more than formal language. But Ethan turned it into the keystone of his plan. The will declared that Vanessa was the inheritor of the entire Caldwell estate, but for 30 days, she was legally bound to uphold the welfare and legacy of the Caldwell family. His voice softened, almost reverent. Family legacy doesn't just mean assets, Henry. It means people. It means history. It means you. And in that moment, everything aligned. The precision of the wording, the strange calm of my son's final months, the unreadable look in his eyes. When Vanessa threw you out, Langford concluded, his voice turning cold and certain, she didn't just act cruelly. She violated the core of that duty, and in doing so, she triggered the next phase of Ethan's plan. She had effectively destroyed the most crucial clause in the will, a single act that shattered any illusion of loyalty or integrity she might have claimed. By doing so, she made it unmistakably clear that she had no intention of protecting the family's legacy or upholding its welfare. Her breach of fiduciary duty was not just reckless. It was the spark that ignited everything that followed. According to Mr. Langford, that single violation granted him, as the executor, full legal power to unseal and activate a secondary document. A sealed codicil to the will, one that my son Ethan had locked away in his private safe. When Langford finished speaking, the dim motel room around me seemed to dissolve. My mind drifted 3 months back to the last peaceful evening I had spent with my son. We had been sitting in the library, surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and wood polish, both of us lost in quiet thought. Ethan was fixated on his laptop, his brow creased in deep concentration. Then, suddenly, he looked up at me, eyes tired, yet strangely resolute. There had been something different about him that night, a gravity that had nothing to do with work. "Dad," he said softly, his tone serious, "if anything ever happens to me, I need you to trust what I've built." I had assumed he was talking about his company, the algorithms, the patents, the empire he was constructing piece by piece. I'd placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and told him, as I always did, that he could count on me. But he had only shaken his head. "No, not just the company," he continued, his gaze flicking back to the glowing laptop screen filled with what I now knew were legal documents. "I mean the system, the one I built to protect you." At the time, his words had puzzled me. I thought he meant a firewall, a trust, perhaps a financial plan. I didn't understand that he had been crafting something far greater, a legal and emotional fortress, designed to shield me from the storm he somehow knew was coming. Now, sitting in that lonely motel room, his voice echoed with perfect clarity. He had been preparing for this very moment. The grief pressing on my chest blended with pride, a bittersweet ache that filled every corner of the silence. My son was gone, but his mind, sharp, strategic, and fiercely protective, was still working, still guiding me. "What do we do now?" I asked Mr. Langford, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. It wasn't trembling anymore. It was the tone of a man who had rediscovered purpose. "We follow Ethan's instructions exactly as written," he replied with quiet authority. "And they were precise. We do not confront her. We do not reveal our position. Ethan's plan depends on patience." He explained that Ethan understood people better than anyone, that true character isn't exposed in conflict but in comfort, when someone believes no one is watching. "Chloe believes she's one of the richest women in the country," Langford said. "We need her to hold onto that belief. But when she tries to cash in, when she attempts to liquidate or wield that supposed wealth, she'll discover that every door is locked tight." Langford outlined the strategy with professional detachment. Using his authority as executor, he would impose procedural holds on every major account, citing standard delays, estate reviews, valuation assessments, tax clearances. Each step would be technically legitimate, yet deliberately slow. It was, as he put it, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. She would still appear powerful, still wear her crown, but her kingdom would be empty. "She'll grow irritated, then furious, then desperate," he predicted calmly. Ethan had known her temperament all too well. The trap he built was perfectly tuned to her weaknesses. "He gave her all the rope she could ever want, Henry," Langford told me. "Now we wait for her to fashion her own noose. Trust the system. Trust your son." When the call ended, the silence of the room no longer felt hollow. I could almost feel the energy humming in the air, the calm before a long-planned storm. My son had set the board long ago. Now it was my turn to move a piece. Langford's instructions for me were both simpler and infinitely harder. "You, Henry, must disappear," he had said. "Not forever, just long enough for her to lower her guard. Let your trail go cold. Don't pick up calls, don't reach out to anyone, not even old friends. To Chloe, and to everyone else, you must look like what she believes you are. A broken, defeated old man hiding away in grief. Your absence will be her reassurance. Your silence, her signal to act carelessly. We finalized the plan. After we hung up, I placed the phone on the worn nightstand and let my eyes wander across the cheap furniture. The stained carpet. The thin curtains filtering the weak glow of the parking lot lights. Just an hour earlier, this place had seemed like the bottom of my life. A grim refuge for a man who had lost everything. But now it had changed. The same room that once reeked of humiliation felt like a command post. The anonymity I'd chosen out of shame had become a tactical advantage. This wasn't a site of defeat anymore. It was a place of preparation, a staging ground for the quiet, deliberate justice my son had left behind. A younger version of me might have called the feeling that stirred in my chest vengeance. But I knew better now. It was purpose, pure and absolute. I might have imagined taking satisfaction in Vanessa's eventual downfall. Yet, as I sat there in silence, surrounded by the heavy stillness of the motel room and the lingering weight of my son's trust reaching across time, I understood this was something far deeper. It wasn't about causing pain. It was about exposing truth, a truth that hurt not because it punished, but because it revealed. This wasn't vengeance. It was the slow and deliberate unfolding of justice, my son's justice. I wasn't an avenger driven by emotion. I was an executor fulfilling the final and most sacred wish of my child, to guard his legacy from the one person who had always sought to destroy it. Ethan's plan was brilliant, a fusion of legal precision and psychological insight, but it relied entirely on one fragile premise: Vanessa's limitless arrogance. A flicker of uncertainty crossed my mind. Could anyone truly be that blind, so consumed by greed and entirely devoid of caution? The plan demanded not just that she fall into the trap, but that she rush toward it, laughing all the while. She would need to disregard every red flag, dismiss every procedural delay, and trust only the illusion she wanted to believe. It seemed the one possible flaw in an otherwise perfect design. I feared she might sense the deception, or worse, hire a lawyer capable enough to advise restraint. And then my doubts turned inward. Would I have the strength to endure this? My role required silence, to vanish from sight, to let her desecrate my son's memory unchecked, at least for a while. I would have to live with the thought of her parties echoing through the home he loved, her laughter reverberating through the library, where we once spoke quietly about books and dreams. I would have to imagine her tearing down everything he built, replacing warmth with vanity. The urge to confront her, to scream, to fight back burned in me like a physical pain. I caught my reflection in the darkened phone screen. The face of a grieving father stared back. Yet beneath that grief, I recognized the man I used to be. A historian who knew that great battles were not always fought in daylight, but won in silence, through patience, observation, and careful execution. Ethan had studied his enemy and built the strategy. Now it was mine to carry out. He had trusted me. I would not fail him. With steady fingers, I pressed the power button on my phone. The faint light faded into darkness, and the screen went cold. The first step of the plan was complete. I had vanished. For the next 3 days, I followed Mr. Langford's instructions precisely. I lived as a ghost within that cheap motel, self-exiled, unseen, and silent. The television stayed off. My phone remained untouched, a lifeless rectangle on the nightstand. Beyond the thin walls, the highway roared with endless motion. But to me, the world had gone still. I didn't realize it at the time, but while I hid in that quiet cocoon of solitude, Vanessa was doing the exact opposite. She had erupted into the world like a blazing star, her greed expanding faster than reason could follow. Later, Mr. Langford would recount the events in his usual measured tone, detailing the spectacle of a woman so blinded by excess she couldn't see the precipice ahead. Her spree began in the city's most luxurious boutiques. She didn't shop like an ordinary customer. She moved like a conqueror taking spoils. Designer handbags I'd never heard of. Watches worth more than my first home. Dresses she'd likely wear once. It wasn't consumption, it was reinvention. She was discarding her old self and wrapping her insecurity in layers of gold and silk. From there, she moved to a supercar dealership, the sort of place where the floors gleamed like mirrors and every car looked like a trophy. She didn't hesitate. She pointed to the most ostentatious vehicle in the room. A blood-red sports car with doors that lifted like wings. Without blinking, she placed a massive, non-refundable deposit, swiping her card as if the act itself proved her worth. When the salesman politely asked when the balance would be paid, she laughed. That high, brittle laugh I could almost hear. As soon as some dull estate paperwork clears up, she told him. Don't worry, the money's real. But her most offensive act, the one that struck me hardest even through secondhand retelling, was what she intended for the house. She hired a celebrity designer known for his cold, sterile minimalism, the very opposite of the warmth Ethan and I had created together. They walked through each room as she issued commands like a monarch redesigning her empire. The oak floors were to be torn up and replaced with white marble. The handcrafted furniture we'd once chosen was to be sold. Yet her cruelest blow came when she reached the library. Mr. Langford's investigator had recorded her voice, dripping with disdain. This room, she declared, is a morgue. All these dusty old books, this heavy wood. It's depressing. I want it gone. White walls, chrome, glass, and a juice bar right over there. She had pointed, the investigator noted, to the very spot where Ethan's favorite reading chair had stood for more than 10 years. She wasn't redesigning the home. She was erasing it and him piece by piece. She was performing a ritual of destruction, a deliberate cleansing meant to wipe away every trace of my son and of me. Her triumph built toward its inevitable crescendo, the party. 3 nights after she had thrown me out, Vanessa hosted a grand, lavish celebration. The house that once echoed with Ethan's quiet laughter was now overflowing with strangers. Her new entourage, drawn as if by magic to the scent of $55 million. Champagne flowed endlessly. A DJ filled the rooms with pounding music. And in the center of it all stood Vanessa, glowing under the lights, radiant and victorious, basking in her illusion of power. Mr. Langford's source later told him that during the evening, one of her newly acquired friends had asked casually about Ethan's father. Vanessa had paused for effect, placing a manicured hand on her chest as though the question pained her deeply. "Oh, Henry," she sighed, her voice carefully measured for sympathy. The poor man was overwhelmed. The grief, the legal mess, the changes. He couldn't handle it. I believe he checked himself into a quiet nursing home up north. It's better that way. He doesn't belong in this world anymore. When Mr. Langford relayed those words to me, I felt no fury, not even sorrow, only a profound, icy pity. She was dancing inside a house of cards, toasting to a future that had already been sealed against her. Vanessa believed herself a queen, ruling over a glittering kingdom, never realizing she was only a performer on a stage my son had constructed, and the final act was already written. The trap was sprung, the bait taken. Now the walls would begin to close in. The morning after her extravagant celebration marked the beginning of her so-called reign. As Mr. Langford later recounted, Vanessa woke late, sunlight spilling across the master bedroom she now occupied alone. The house was silent. The caterers had scrubbed away the remnants of the night before, leaving everything spotless and hollow. She likely felt invincible, the reigning monarch of a $55 million empire. Eager to inaugurate her new life with a display of effortless luxury, she took Ethan's sleek sedan, which she now considered her own, and drove into the city. After a stop at her favorite jewelry boutique, she settled into a fashionable cafe frequented by the city's elite. Surrounded by soft music and the clinking of porcelain, she ordered a lavish coffee and a delicate pastry, then presented her new black credit card, the one tied directly to the estate's main account. The barista swiped once, then again. A polite crease formed between his brows. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quietly to avoid attention. "It's been declined." Vanessa laughed, sharp and incredulous. "That's impossible," she snapped. "Try it again." He did. The result didn't change. A flicker of embarrassment crossed her face as a woman at the next table glanced up. She handed over another card, also linked to the estate. Declined again. Flustered, she paid with the few bills left in her designer handbag and retreated to her car, her expression carved in cold rage. She immediately called the private banking line. The representative answered in a polished, professional tone that only deepened her fury. "Yes, Mrs. Caldwell," the banker said after checking the account. "I see the issue. There's a temporary procedural hold on all accounts associated with the Caldwell estate." Vanessa's voice was sharp. "A what? I'm the sole beneficiary. That's my money. Lift the hold now." "I'm afraid I can't do that, ma'am," the banker replied evenly. "The order came from the executor, Mr. Langford. It's a standard measure pending asset valuation for probate court. My hands are tied." Vanessa sat in stunned silence, the world outside her windshield gleaming indifferent. For the first time, genuine fear crept through her. She sped home, her thoughts spinning faster than the tires on the road. The phone was ringing as she entered the house. It was the celebrity interior designer. Gone was his sugary charm. His tone was clipped and irritated. "Vanessa, darling," he began briskly. "We've hit a snag. My demolition crew arrived this morning to start on the library, but they were turned away. A legal notice was served, a temporary injunction against any structural changes, filed by the estate's executor. My workers are billing me for standing idle. What exactly is happening?" Vanessa sank into a pristine white sofa, the phone cold in her hand. The walls she had planned to demolish suddenly felt like they were closing in. Before she could answer, another call cut through, the car salesman from the Maserati dealership. His cheer was gone. His voice was all business. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said crisply, "I'm calling regarding the final payment for the Gran Turismo. Your deposit reserves the car for 72 hours. We're now at hour 75. If we don't receive the wire today, I'll have to release the vehicle to another buyer. As per your contract, the deposit is non-refundable." The symbol of her new identity, the gleaming sports car, was slipping through her fingers. Every pillar of her new world was collapsing within hours. Panic took hold. Her bravado melted into desperation. She jabbed at her phone, dialing Mr. Langford's office. The moment he answered, her composure shattered. "What have you done?" she screamed. "Why are my accounts frozen? Why can't I access my money? This is my house. You work for me. I am the estate. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you." As Mr. Langford later told me, he simply held the phone away from his ear, waiting for the tempest to pass. When her fury finally ebbed into ragged breathing, he spoke, calm, steady, unshaken. "Mrs. Caldwell, I understand your frustration, but as I'm sure you know, the settlement of an estate of this size involves complex procedures." "Standard procedure?" she shrieked. "There's nothing standard about this. I assure you, Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Langford continued, his tone maddeningly composed. "Every action I've taken is entirely standard and fully compliant with probate law. Each measure serves to safeguard the estate's assets during the evaluation period. I am, quite literally, following the letter of the law." Her response was an inarticulate scream, the sound of a spoiled child denied what she believed she was owed. She was pounding her fists against an invisible wall, one made not of steel or stone but of legality, procedure, and my son's flawless, patient design. After a final burst of fury and one last incoherent threat, she slammed the phone down. She was trapped, not by chains or locks, but by the very system she had once believed made her powerful. She was a queen confined within a golden cage, and my son, through the steady hand of Mr. Langford, had just turned the key. 5 days. That was all it took for her glittering empire to decay. According to the updates I received over the motel's crackling landline, those invisible walls held perfectly. The life that had sparkled with champagne and laughter only a week earlier now collapsed in silence. The unpaid invoices from the caterers and DJ arrived marked with angry red warnings demanding immediate payment. The interior designer sent a scathing message along with a bill for his wasted time. The car dealership called one last time. The red sports car had been sold to another buyer, and her deposit was gone for good. Her new circle of wealthy admirers, the ones who had toasted her name under chandeliers, suddenly vanished. Her calls went unanswered, her texts unread. The mansion that once seemed so full of light must have become unbearably still. She was the ruler of a paper kingdom, and the gentlest breeze had torn it apart. Her first instinct, according to Mr. Langford's investigator, was to find me. The irony was poetic. The woman who had told me to go die in a dumpster was now scouring the city for the man she had discarded. Perhaps she thought she could intimidate me, that she could somehow talk or threaten me into calling off the lawyer and freeing her funds. She drove from one address to another, the homes of my old colleagues and friends, people she had long treated with disdain. At each door, she was met with polite refusals. "I'm sorry, Vanessa, we haven't seen Henry. No, he hasn't called." Every closed door mirrored the one she had once slammed in my face. The once celebrated millionaire was now the one being turned away. The master of the house had become the exile. By the 5th day, her anger had burned out, leaving behind only exhaustion and despair. Every attempt had failed. Every connection was gone. Every path forward was blocked. She was powerless, cornered by her own arrogance and by the quiet brilliance of my son's plan. There remained only one place she could turn, the office of the man she had screamed at. This time she would need to approach him differently. Humility, or at least the imitation of it, was all she had left. Stripped of her pride and pretending at composure, she made her way to Mr. Langford's downtown office. A woman once worth $55 million who could no longer afford a parking meter. That was where the end began. Mr. Langford had called me earlier that morning. His tone was calm but final. "Henry," he said softly, "it's time. I think she's ready to listen." He had arranged for a car to collect me. I dressed carefully, choosing the simple navy suit I had worn to Ethan's wedding. When I arrived, I took a seat in the quiet wood-paneled waiting room of Langford and Finch. I wasn't anxious. I felt an unshakable calm. Not the calm of revenge, but of completion. I was not a man waiting for apology or vindication. I was a father fulfilling his son's final wish. I spent the hour reading, a history book resting comfortably in my hands. When the door finally opened, I didn't look up right away. I finished my paragraph, then lowered the book. She stood there, hesitant, framed by the doorway. She looked nothing like the triumphant woman who had once sneered through the will reading or the glittering hostess of that garish party. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her immaculate hair hung in disarray, and her eyes, wide, hollow, frightened, told me everything before she spoke a single word. Her gaze moved across the room, searching for the receptionist. Then it found me. The moment her eyes met mine, I saw it all unfold in silence. Confusion first, then shock, and finally the sick, dawning horror of recognition. She understood. This wasn't bad luck or bureaucratic delay. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan, flawless, deliberate, and unrelenting. And at the center of it all sat the old man she had thrown into the rain without a thought. I watched her expression change as though time had slowed. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief hardened into fear. The fear of a player who suddenly realizes the game was over long before she knew she'd begun to lose. The speech she had prepared, the pleas she had rehearsed on her way there, all died on her lips. The arrogance, the fury, the pride gone. What remained was raw, trembling panic. The look of a queen who had just discovered her crown was made of glass. "Henry," she whispered, her voice so faint it barely stirred the air. Then, realizing her vulnerability, she quickly attempted to recover her composure, forcing a brittle smile. "Father," she stammered, stepping uncertainly into the room. I've been looking for you everywhere. I was worried." The lie was so fragile, so transparent, it bordered on pathetic. In a single, desperate sentence, she was trying to rewrite the last 5 days, pretending to be a concerned daughter instead of a dethroned despot. I simply looked at her. I didn't smile, didn't frown, offered no anger to fight against, no pity to feed upon. I said nothing. In that moment, I realized silence was the most powerful weapon I had. It required no explanation, no justification. My stillness became a mirror, forcing her to see her own reflection. The cruelty, the greed, the choices she had made. It was a condemnation more piercing than any outburst could ever be. Under that unspoken judgment, she began to crumble. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for escape, for someone to rescue her from the truth closing in. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she murmured, voice trembling. "Things, they just got out of hand. The pressure, I wasn't thinking." The words fell apart as quickly as she spoke them. She could see in my eyes that I knew the performance was over. The silence stretched, long, taut, unbreakable, until the door to the inner office opened. Mr. Langford appeared, composed as ever, in a dark, immaculate suit. His face betrayed nothing. He looked at her first, then at me, and in that brief exchange I understood everything. "Mrs. Caldwell." "Henry," he said evenly, "if you'll please join me in the conference room, we can begin." His voice cut through the air like a quiet blade. He held the door open. I closed the book resting in my lap, setting it carefully on the side table. Rising slowly, I felt no weakness in my step, no trace of the defeated man she had cast out into the rain. A quiet dignity settled over me like a well-worn coat. I walked toward the conference room. After a hesitant pause, she followed. She was no longer a queen in command of her empire. She was a defendant being led to judgment. The short distance between the waiting room and that door felt endless, each step stripping away another layer of her pride. By the time we entered, the power dynamic that had once defined us was gone. We were simply a father and his daughter-in-law, standing before the final truth of my son's legacy. Inside, the conference room gleamed with cold professionalism. Mr. Langford sat at the head of the long mahogany table, composed, deliberate, immovable. I took the chair on his right. Vanessa sat on his left, her posture rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. The air felt thick, charged like the moment before a storm. She tried to arrange her face into that of a wronged woman, the victim of some clerical mistake. But her eyes betrayed her. They were the eyes of someone cornered and frightened. "Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Caldwell," Mr. Langford began, his tone as measured as ever. "You are here today because you have suddenly found yourself unable to access the assets of your late husband's estate. The reason for that, I assure you, is not an error. It is, in fact, very straightforward." He slid a single document across the table, a copy of the will that had been read just over a week before. "If you recall," he said, tapping a highlighted section with his pen, "this document names you as the primary beneficiary and steward of the Caldwell estate. But it also binds you, under Section 2, to a legally enforceable fiduciary duty." He drew out a second copy and gestured to a paragraph marked in yellow. The clause clearly states that for a period of 30 days, the inheritor assumes a solemn responsibility to preserve the welfare of the immediate family and uphold the integrity of the Caldwell legacy. It's a probationary period, if you will, overseen by me as executor. Vanessa's gaze moved rapidly across the words, confusion warring with panic as she tried to process what she was seeing. 5 days ago, Mr. Langford continued, on the afternoon of September 17th, you violated that clause in a profound and irreversible way. He placed a thin folder beside the will. "This is a sworn affidavit from your father-in-law, Henry Caldwell," he said. "It details how you forcibly removed him, the only remaining member of the immediate Caldwell family, from his home. It includes your statement to him, quoted directly, 'Go die in a dumpster.'" Hearing those words spoken aloud in that sterile setting felt like the final sealing of judgment. Vanessa flinched, her face draining of color. She stared down at the folder, then at me, her mouth opening and closing without sound. She had no defense. The truth had already been documented. Mr. Langford leaned forward slightly, his expression unwavering. "You see, Mrs. Caldwell, this first will was not merely a legal instrument. It was a test, a question your late husband needed answered." He paused. "That question was simple. Were you worthy of his trust? Were you capable of safeguarding his family, his life's work, and his name?" I watched realization sink in, slow and terrible. She understood now. She hadn't been a participant in a financial arrangement. She had been the subject of a moral trial, and she had failed beyond recovery. "Your actions," Mr. Langford said, his tone lowering to quiet intensity, "provided the answer to that question with absolute clarity. Which brings me to another matter." He let the silence stretch. "Tell me, Mrs. Caldwell, did you pay attention to every word of the will, particularly Section 4, Subclause C? The part that outlines the automatic activation of Codicil B in the event of a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty by the primary beneficiary?" Her face went blank, pure, paralyzed disbelief. She had only heard the $55 million, the house, the luxury. Everything else had been background noise. Mr. Langford reached calmly into his leather briefcase. My pulse slowed to a steady, solemn rhythm. He didn't pull out a stack of contracts or thick folders. Only a single sealed envelope, heavy with meaning. He withdrew a single, cream-colored envelope, elegant and understated, its flap sealed with a circle of deep blue wax pressed by the Caldwell family's signet ring, the same one I had given Ethan on the day he graduated from college. Mr. Langford placed it precisely in the center of the polished mahogany table. It sat there in perfect stillness, a small and quiet object holding the weight of an earthquake. Vanessa stared at it as though it were alive, her breath shallow, her expression frozen in dread. Mr. Langford folded his hands neatly before him. "This codicil, Mrs. Caldwell," he said evenly, "legally nullifies the document we read last week in its entirety. This," his voice deepened with deliberate finality, "is Ethan's true and final will." He reached for a small silver letter opener, slid it under the blue seal, and broke the wax. The sharp sound of tearing paper seemed to echo endlessly in the silence. Then he unfolded a single sheet of parchment and began to read aloud, his calm voice carrying the weight of my son's last words. "This is the codicil to the last will and testament of Ethan Caldwell," he read, "activated this morning by the authority granted to my executor. It hereby renders all previous versions of my will null and void. The distribution of my estate is as follows." He looked directly at Vanessa, whose eyes were wide with disbelief. "1," he continued, "all my assets, without exception, including all shares in Caldwell Dynamics, all financial portfolios, and the residence at 114 Willow Creek Lane, are to be transferred immediately into a newly formed irrevocable trust to be known as the Caldwell Legacy Trust." He paused, allowing the silence to settle like dust after an explosion. 2. "The sole trustee, manager, and administrator of this trust shall be my father, Henry Caldwell." I felt the air leave my lungs, replaced by something heavy and sacred. It was not triumph I felt, but reverence. A solemn understanding that my son's final purpose now rested in my hands. 3. Mr. Langford continued, "The primary mission of this trust shall be to establish and sustain the Ethan Caldwell Innovation Scholars Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to providing education and scholarships in technology and engineering for underprivileged youth, a cause my son valued deeply." Then came the last clause. Mr. Langford looked at Vanessa again, his tone unflinching. 4. To my wife, Vanessa Caldwell, the trust will provide a monthly stipend of $2,000. This support is contingent upon her maintaining verifiable, full-time employment. She shall be permitted to reside rent-free in the guest cottage on the property. Any failure to comply with these terms will result in immediate and permanent termination of all financial assistance. The words hung in the air, as cold and merciless as stone. My son hadn't condemned her to ruin. He had given her something far harsher, a life of honest work, of humility, of earning rather than taking. He had given her the one thing she had always feared most, ordinariness. Vanessa sat motionless, the color draining from her face. The vast empire she had imagined herself ruling. $55 million. The cars, the parties, the adoration, dissolved like mist. Mr. Langford folded the letter neatly and returned it to its envelope. The sound of paper brushing against wood broke her. A faint gasp escaped her lips, and then her body went limp. She slumped sideways in her chair and collapsed to the carpet in a dead faint. The mighty queen of the Caldwell estate was gone, replaced by a broken woman lying unconscious on the floor of a lawyer's office, undone not by betrayal, but by justice. My son's will had been fulfilled. 6 months passed. 6 months that reshaped my world into something alive again. The silence of that motel room was long gone, replaced by the vibrant hum of creation. The ghost I had once been had found new purpose. I stood at a podium, surrounded by the scent of new paint and possibility. I wore the same navy suit I had worn to Mr. Langford's office, but it no longer felt like armor. It felt like ceremony, a uniform for a guardian of legacy. Before me sat rows of bright, eager faces, the first graduating class of the Ethan Caldwell Innovation Scholars Foundation. Good morning, I began, my voice strong and clear. My name is Henry Caldwell, and I am my son's father. I told them about Ethan, not the entrepreneur or the genius, but the boy who once dismantled our television just to understand how it worked. The young man who believed that technology was meant to lift everyone, not just the privileged few. Many will remember my son for the fortune he created, I said. But wealth was never his goal. It was only the consequence of a greater dream. His true legacy is this. I gestured to the room around us. The glowing screens, the smart boards, the excited faces of students who would one day build futures of their own. Ethan believed that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. He wanted to open doors for those who had only ever known walls. Today, we are not just opening a building, we are continuing his work. We are fulfilling his true will. Not the one written on paper, but the one written in his heart. Applause filled the room, warm and alive. And for a brief moment, my thoughts drifted to Vanessa. I no longer thought of her with anger. In truth, I rarely thought of her at all. But I know where she is. My son's trust, in its quiet and methodical way, still keeps watch over her. The image that comes to my mind is not of boardrooms or mansions, but of a modest downtown coffee shop during the morning rush. Vanessa stands behind the counter, wearing a simple green apron with her name printed on a small plastic tag. Her once flawless hair is now pulled back in a plain ponytail, and her face is bare, free of the expensive makeup she once considered armor. She moves efficiently, frothing milk, calling out orders, wiping the counter with mechanical precision. She looks tired, the deep kind of fatigue that settles into the bones after 8 hours on one's feet. When a customer complains that his latte isn't hot enough, I see a flicker of the old fire in her eyes, a brief spark of the entitlement that once ruled her. But it fades almost instantly, replaced by quiet submission. "I'm very sorry, sir," she says softly. "I'll make you a new one." She hasn't been condemned to poverty. She's been sentenced to consequence, to a life of ordinary, honest work. And in her own way, she serves that sentence every day. A gentle tug on my sleeve pulls me back to the present. A young girl, no more than 14, beams up at me and points to her computer screen. On it, a small cartoon dog wags its tail, animated by a few simple lines of code she has written herself. Her eyes gleam with pride and discovery. I smile, a real smile that warms something deep within me. My son's will has created two worlds. For Vanessa, a life of quiet accountability. For me, one of vibrant, noisy purpose. I've come to understand that justice isn't always found in dramatic courtroom battles. Sometimes, it's found in the slow, steady work of building something better in the very space where something was broken. The library is my office now. Once a silent sanctuary of memory, it has become the living heart of Ethan's legacy. The dark oak shelves remain, but they share space with whiteboards filled with sketches and plans. The air, once heavy with the scent of old paper, now hums with energy and hope. In the evenings, after the staff has gone home, I often sit at Ethan's old desk. A photograph rests in the corner, a picture from a hiking trip years ago. He's grinning, sunlight in his eyes, the whole world ahead of him. When I look at it, I no longer feel sorrow, only quiet pride. Justice, I've learned, isn't always loud or thunderous. It doesn't require a gavel strike or a shouted verdict. Sometimes, it's the soft, satisfying click of a plan fulfilling its purpose exactly as intended. My son didn't leave behind piles of money. He left behind a mission, a legacy built on the belief that success means little unless it lifts others. His inheritance to me wasn't wealth, but meaning. In fulfilling his true will, I reclaimed more than a house. I reclaimed myself. I found a purpose greater than grief, a reason to wake each morning and continue what he began. I became again the man my son always believed I was. This story reminds me, and I hope reminds you, that true justice is often quiet, deliberate, and wise. Real strength doesn't roar in anger. It endures in patience and foresight. Ethan's victory was never about punishing his wife. It was about protecting his purpose, proving that integrity and compassion outlast greed. The greatest inheritance we leave is not in numbers on a page, but in the lives we touch and the principles we defend. The most powerful response to arrogance is not rage, but the calm precision of a plan that restores balance and honors what truly matters. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever found strength through patience or wisdom, please like this video and subscribe for more stories like this one. I'd be honored to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice and your story matter. Thank you for being part of this journey.